Warning. This episode contains brain food that will lead to improved emotional and social intelligence. Give us 1 hour and we'll help you change the way you think about happiness. Harvesting Happiness with Lisa Cypers Kamen is fresh, optimistic, and purpose-driven media that promotes well-being from the inside out. Each week, Lisa spotlights diverse trendsetters and change agents who are the greatest contemporary thinkers and doers, devoting their lives to creating a better world in which to live. Your host, Lisa Cypers Kamen, is a widely recognized applied positive psychology expert, author, documentary filmmaker, and lecturer specializing in optimal lifestyle management. Let's get to it. Here's Lisa.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining us on today's show, where you will learn about logging off, life, death, and caretaking our digital footprints. My first guests are Abbey Schneiderman, Adam Seifer, and Newman. They are the co-authors of In Case You Get Hit by a Bus, a plan to organize your life now for when you're not around later. And let me give you a little nano bio of each of our guests. Abbey Schneiderman is co-founder and co-CEO of Everplans. She's an industry leader, an expert in the areas of digital estate planning, technology, and consumerism, and she is a Forbes.com contributor. Adam Seifer is also co-founder and co-CEO of Everplans. He has helped create multiple online communities and networks. He is an inventor of the social networking patent now owned by LinkedIn. Newman serves as Everplans editorial and education director and has spent his career as a writer and content leader. And they are in the house. And I am so glad you are, guys, because I've got a story for you.
Yeah, we're so excited to be here.
We really want to hear the story.
Oh, let me give you the story. Picture this. This is a thought experiment. Dies suddenly without a will, and you don't know what the F to do to help. And that's why you're here.
Yeah, it's a story we know. First of all, we're so sorry to hear about your loss and the fact that you were the person who had to be left with the mess of having to deal with all of those logistics. And as we talk about all the time, after having been through a loss and in that fog of, so many emotions, it's not the right time to have to be dealing with all of the logistics, possibly the most complicated logistics of any situation you'll ever have to deal with. So we're so sorry.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I'll tell you, it has been an administrative nightmare and a real education of what not to do. So everybody listening, the bottom line is you have to do an estate plan. If you want to be a responsible adult, you got to figure it out. You got to think about this for a minute because it'll make you happy to know that all of your affairs are tidied up, and it will make you appreciate the life that you have. I mean, I just want to add that in there.
It's exactly right. And even doing a little bit of thinking ahead and planning ahead can go a long way. It doesn't have to be super complicated.
So let's talk about the elements of planning for our demise. And I say that tongue in cheek because it's really also planning for our legacy.
That's so true.
Yeah. Where would you like us to start?
Anywhere you want. You're the experts. I'm just the accidental administrator.
We find that a lot of people end up becoming the accidental administrator. And for us, a lot of times, like when we were working on this book and when we work on Everplans, a lot of it is just laying out a simple procedure. So you start getting things organized now and it just becomes a habit. So when an emergency happens, when someone needs to step in, they're not completely overwhelmed. You've already done some of the work and it's already been part of your life. So a lot of times, and I know we could have Adam start with this, is we really focus heavily on passwords because the world has become so digital right now that without those, you're pretty much lost.
Oh my gosh. Wait 1 second. I just want to talk about the password nightmare. The one thing she did organize, she left a binder with all of her passwords. That's it.
Well, that's pretty good.
That was helpful.
Yeah, you're better than most people. And, these days, the average internet user has more than 130 different accounts. And, they all require usernames and passwords. And according to a Pew Research Center study, 65% of people say that they keep them all in their head. So you got lucky that you got the binder. And, a big problem that we find is that when people are keeping them all in their head and they're memorizing them all, they can't remember different passwords for every site. So they end up having the same password for multiple websites, which everybody knows at this point is just asking for trouble. And so even if you're not thinking ahead to what happens if something happens to you for somebody else, just for yourself, you should keep your passwords organized somewhere. And we recommend having a password organizer and making sure that somebody knows the master password to that.
Oh my gosh. I mean, having a password manager will change your life. If you don't, I was out to dinner with friends just last week, and two of them told me that they didn't have a password manager. And I was shocked. And I said, listen, if you do nothing else after this dinner, just go home and sign up for a password manager. And there are a few different really good ones. I use Dashlane, for example, but it'll totally change your life.
And Abby will cut off that friendship if they don't get a password manager, right, Abby? No more. They're out of your life forever.
Wow.
Well, they were sort of new friends, so
okay.
I'll give them a little bit of a pass.
Wow, I should be slapped. I now I need to get one. Now I know that this is a project that I have to deal with, but I'm hoping that it imports all the accounts and you don't have to put them in there manually, do you?
I mean, these password managers are set up so well. First, you don't create your own passwords. It generates them for you. So they're much safer. You're not reusing them. And as you use it, Adam and Abby, when I first started, they started Everplans. I came on a year or two into it. And I was skeptical. This system's going to watch all my passwords. I don't trust it. I'm kind of paranoid about that. And after like a month or two, I could not see. Why was I making my life so hard? It was so difficult. Now the accounts have gotten so out of control that there's no way a person can manage it without a system. And getting that binder, while it's helpful, if they're out of date, that could be even more frustrating than having no passwords. If you're trying to log in and they're all different passwords, you think you struck gold, and then you realize you're still far away from the finish line.
And Lisa, it's not that hard to get started, because if you install a password manager and you just keep doing what you're already doing, which is logging into websites manually, each time you do that, it'll remember what you did. And then the next time you go to that website, it'll just do it for you. Oh,
all righty. All right. All right. Number one tip, get a password manager. No matter how old or young you are, get the password manager. I like that. Okay. Next, what other planning activities can we do immediately?
I think with our system, we like to say what you have now to start with, because we separate it by 3 levels: what you have, what you want to get, and then how to make your plan personalized. So when you start with what you have, the assets, property, the accounts you have, the contacts you have in your life, it gets a lot easier. And then I think that's the part that people, if they get organized, you're really ahead of the game, and you could really start with a solid foundation.
Yeah. And so the book has an approach that, as Jean was saying, takes people through these 3 levels. And we've put the most essential things that you need to gather in level 1, so that in a pinch, you can focus on what we're talking about now, critical passwords, because they are really the keys to the kingdom. And we'll explain how you keep those organized, how you make sure that they're safely shared with people who need them. And then we walk you through how to gather baseline information about critical financial accounts or insurance policies that you have, so that your family knows where to start, and they don't become one of these billions of dollars in unclaimed policies that exist every year. And then lastly, who are the important contacts in your life? Anything from doctors to lawyers to your employer or neighbors that, would need to be contacted in the event of an emergency.
This is great stuff. And it replaces the fireproof box that my grandparents used to keep in their house. I remember as a kid, there was the special box that had everything. And this is the digital version of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Adam.
And I was just going to say, and having it digital is really great, because these days people don't usually live in the same city as the rest of their family. And so if something happens to you, you don't want people to have to fly to where you live to get into that little fireproof box.
So true, so true. Can be done without an attorney. How much you actually can do on your own and have dominion over your life and your stuff, or the end of your life and your stuff?
Very easily and inexpensively. In some cases, it's free. There are a lot of great online services. And then one of the things that we recommend that people do is to think about what's called your advance directive, which you don't need an attorney to do. But an advance directive is usually the combination of a living will, where you outline which types of treatments you do and do not want in the event that you're not able to advocate for yourself. And then you name a healthcare proxy or a healthcare power of attorney, who's the person who can make those decisions and make sure that you get those things that you do and you don't want in the event that it's needed. And you don't need an attorney to create an advance directive.
This is what I learned. It's very interesting, and it feels very empowering when you take charge of this stuff. It's not a fun subject matter, but I think once you get in there and you start addressing these things, there is an internal shift, like you're sort of taking care of business, and it feels pretty good.
And we hear from people that they feel like a hero, after doing this, and they can sleep better at night. It's peace of mind.
Yeah. And we've learned that a lot of times, especially promoting this over the past year, promoting the book, that a lot of people sometimes get hung up on the wrong things. They really focus on the will. They really focus on the legal aspects. And for us, it's about the decisions. It's about what do you have and where do you want it to go? Who do you want, if you need guardians? Who will be raising your kids? Making that decision. And the legal aspect, the documents, which you could, again, do online or talk with an estate attorney if your situation's a little more complicated. That's like the finishing touch. But making those decisions, that's what takes the time. Making the decisions, as Adam said, with an advance directive, what treatments would or wouldn't you want if there wasn't much hope? Yeah. Who would you want handling your finances if something went wrong or you couldn't do it yourself? Where should your assets end up? Who would administer your estate? Make those decisions, get those in your mind, understand it. Then when you do the documents, you're not going to be as overwhelmed or intimidated as people sometimes feel like they will be.
We are going to need to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to continue the conversation about the book and the thought experiment in case you get hit by a bus, a plan to organize your life now for when you're not around later. To learn more about this book and my guests, Abbey Schneiderman, Adam Seifer, and Jean Newman, please visit everplans.com, on Twitter at Everplans, and also the same handle on Facebook and Instagram, Everplans. Let's take a pause. We'll be right back, and that is a promise. Before we take that little break, think about this. Did you know that only 9% of plastics actually get recycled? That's super disappointing and very wasteful, given the effort we're all making to save, sort, and recycle product packaging. If you've been wanting to use more sustainably sourced home care and beauty products, then you need Grove Collaborative for earth-friendly cleaning essentials. Grove carries hundreds of products that replace single-use plastics across your home and personal care routine. And by 2025, Grove will be 100% plastic free. Grove Co.'s concentrated cleaners and refillable glass bottles are friendlier to the planet and twice as effective as other leading natural brands. Now's the time to switch to sustainable products for every room in your home, from laundry care to self-care. Grove Co. has got you covered with safe formulas and earth-friendly packaging that will deliver a greener clean without compromising performance. For years, I've been a subscriber to Grove Collaborative for all my eco-friendly household needs. Right now, I'm using Grove Co.'s orange and rosemary scented multi-purpose cleaner concentrate and reusable glass spray bottle to mix up my everyday cleanup solution. Join me and more than 2 million households who trust Grove Collaborative to make their homes happier and healthier. Go to grove.com/happiness today to get a free gift set worth up to $50 with your first order. Plus, shipping is fast and free. Get started right now at grove.com/happiness. grove.com/happiness. Now let's take that break. We'll be right back.
To learn more about cultivating sustainable well-being at home and the office, visit harvestinghappiness.com and explore Lisa's experiential on-site brain fitness workshops, corporate programming, and speaking engagement services.
And we're back talking about logging off life, death, and caretaking our digital footprints. Let's get back to the conversation. So guys, let's go back to what we were talking about. We were saying about it's really good to organize, decide sort of the roles that you want people to have, how to manage your passwords, how to start thinking about the process of who is going to administrate my life when I no longer am able to do it. Let's talk a little bit about when it's time to bring in an attorney. We touched upon this, that not everything needs to go through an attorney, but there are times when it does.
Adam, let's hear from Adam here.
Sure. Well, I think when you're doing your will, as we mentioned before, in a lot of cases, it's really easy to just do a simple will and do it online. And one of the common misconceptions that people have is that you have to be wealthy to do a will. And that's not the case at all. It's really important if, for instance, if you're a parent of a young child, to do a will, because that's where you name guardians in case something happens to both parents. But if you have a complex situation where, for instance, you have like a multiple mixed marriages in your family, and there's a bunch of stepchildren and half children, that's a really good situation where maybe you want to get an attorney's help doing your will. Or if you own some complex investments, or you own property in multiple states or even multiple countries, those are usually scenarios where it's a good idea to get an estate attorney involved to make sure that you get everything papered exactly right.
I want to add one more scenario to this that we don't often think about, and that is the case of domestic partners or same-sex couples that are not married, because the law says that when your spouse dies, right, your assets go to your spouse and your children, your immediate relatives. Well, in the case of them not being immediate relatives, and I use this example for my aunt and her partner, they were together for nearly 40 years. Thank goodness they had a registered domestic partnership in the state of California, because otherwise he would have gotten nothing.
And that's a factor, because in California it's that way. In other states it'll be different. And a lot of times if you do the paperwork on this, if you name someone in these situations, then they have a higher likelihood of it actually working out that way. Because even in certain states, it's not a guarantee that a spouse will get. There could be other siblings. There could be other people that are listed. Anything you have an account for that requires a beneficiary, you name that person. Doesn't matter what it is, because that will supersede and override. You want transfer on death. Adam, you've talked about joint tenacity, JT Rose, in the past that we included in the book, which is having joint tenacity of property. So basically other people with rights of survivorship. So it automatically passes to that person, and you do skip the courts, because the main goal is to not have them tied up in court for a very long time, where it can end up getting expensive and incredibly stressful.
Oi, let me just give you a huge oi, because this situation is in probate, and it's laborious, it's complicated. Thankfully we do have an attorney that's handling it, but you just don't want to find yourself there. It's avoidable. Yeah,
you can also end up in just a really terrible situation. A story that we heard in interviewing people for the book was an amazing woman who had just lost her husband, who had committed suicide, unfortunately. And apparently she was not listed as his wife on any of their accounts. And when he died, she had $7,000 in her bank account or something like that, some crazy situation. And she wasn't able to access any funds. She had to borrow money from her mom. And it was, she said that, she has any lesson to teach. It's to make sure that both parties or all important parties are listed on any major accounts.
So not just within the estate plan documents, but that means going to the banks, the financial institutions, listing beneficiaries and or powers of attorney on those accounts.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. A lot of it
exactly. And, for instance, if you get a new job and you're signing up for your employee benefits when you're starting your job, that's usually a place where you're filling out a lot of paperwork all at once, and you're naming a bunch of beneficiaries for things like little life insurance or disability insurance policies. And those things end up really mattering, because if you don't have a beneficiary or you don't have the right beneficiary in place, it goes to the estate, and then those funds get held up in probate for as long as probate takes, and sometimes it can take a really long time.
Years, plural. I mean, in this case that, with my aunt, that won't be the case. It may be a year, but there are probates that last for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, especially a lot of times we'll use celebrity examples to get Prince's
Give us a juicy celebrity story.
It's been it's coming up on 7 years, I think, and still not settled. It's something that's going on. DMX now, no will, same thing. That could go on for the next 10 years. And while that happens, when you see the figures that are, and most people, again, might not have either $100 million or the ability for their estate to generate, Elvis Presley type, huge estates over for the next 50 years. Someone like Prince, that could be $1 billion estate. That could over the course of time. And a lot of times people don't realize this because they don't think I'm going to get this together. Something's going to happen. There's superstition. But from a pure business, practical, logistical sense, making some of these little decisions will prevent it because people will come out and families that you think everyone's getting along and perfect, those little rivalries, those little problems that they've had over the years can surface at this time because the grief manifests itself into other things. Could be, feeling slighted, could feel like I deserve more than this person. And they'll take it to court. And usually it's the attorneys that win because the family doesn't.
Yeah, it's just really important to start talking about these things, thinking about these things ahead of time, because you just do not want to be dealing with it after the fact.
So true. So true. Oh my goodness. All right. Give us maybe a story of a happy ending here. I'm sure I'm sure that there as a case study where things just went right,
Well, I've got one. It's a happy-ish ending because, it's usually around an ending that's not happy in and of itself, but at least the way it worked out was good. So about 2 years ago, my mom was battling cancer. And I took some time and sat down with her and my dad and had a conversation about a bunch of things. And it started with just helping my mom organize her medications. But that allowed me to lever into a conversation about what kind of treatments maybe she would and would not want if things got really serious towards the end. And, it was an uncomfortable conversation to start, but once we got going, it just started to flow. And we ended up getting into her advanced directive and looking at her healthcare proxy and living will, which it turned out had been done like 30 years before and were completely not at all what she wanted. And so I was able to get hers redone and do my dad's at the same time. And what ended up happening is over the course of this conversation, I learned a lot about what mattered to her. And then about 4 months later, when the end actually came and she couldn't communicate anymore, I knew exactly what she wanted, which was to be at home. And I knew what she didn't want. And I wasn't tortured wondering if the decisions that I was making were the right ones. And there were no sort of contentious arguments with anybody else in my family. We knew exactly how to get her the situation that she wanted. And so her end turned out to be very peaceful. And we were spending our time being with her instead of scrambling to figure out all of these logistical decisions that families usually need to make. And so the small conversation that we had a few months earlier ended up making all the difference.
To me, that is a happy ending story. It's not happy that you lost your mom, and I'm sorry for that. But it's like falls under the category of dying the good death, where the person is really in charge of their life.
Exactly. And it felt great to be able to give that to her because there's nothing else that you could give the person at that point. That's the only thing. And we did it. And it was a great feeling. And it still is a great feeling.
The other thing is you were describing sitting down with your mom and going through, what started as the talk about the medication and then moved deeper into the conversation was the opportunity to have this intimate time with your mom. And I think that it is the side benefit of having these kinds of conversations with our loved ones.
Absolutely. And we say, this all the time, but these things might seem like sensitive topics, but they can also be viewed as having, practical discussions with your family. And I've mentioned this story before, but at my brother's funeral, my brother died, almost 9 years ago at this point in a car accident. And it was an absolute disaster for us. And at the time, in addition to all the other things that were disasters, we probably paid way too much for his casket because we didn't know any better at the time. And they bring you into this room and they show you all these different caskets, and you feel badly you feel a little badly going with the cheapest option, which is their plain pine box. And when discussing this with my parents, my mom said, no, she said, if I die, just do not spend too much money on me. I want the plain pine box. But my dad surprised us all by saying that he wanted the most expensive casket that we could find. And honestly, it was
wanted
really
the Rolls Royce casket.
He did. He said he wanted because he was there in the room and he sees there's this one that's mahogany with velvet line. It was crazy. And it's probably $20,000. But you know what? It was really good to know because we had no idea that he wanted that. And then actually just a few weeks ago, we were at a funeral and this incredible, fancy casket was in front of us. And I said to him, Dad, do you still want that? Is that, what you're still hoping for here? And he said, well, I don't really feel like spending all that money. That seems like a waste of money. I'll just go with the plain pine box. So I said, great. Well, I'm glad we're having these conversations because it could turn into huge fights with somebody else, if I'm in the room and they're like, Dad wanted this. So it's just important to have these conversations. They might seem difficult, but they're just really good to have ahead of time.
And also, the personal aspect, because what you hear from both of the stories is that, there's logistics. And we always say your assets, things will end up somewhere at some point. But the stories, how you lived your life, those things, especially as you get older and you wonder, wow, what could I have asked my grandparents that I was too young to know and ask them about that? What would I have liked to know about my parents? That you never can ask when someone's gone. Who was in that photo that's really old, that's barely held together, but you're wondering, was that our great-grandparents? So those are the things that over time, as the estate gets settled, which it will, they all do eventually, but as it gets settled, those are the questions that linger for the next decade, for the rest of your life. So getting that stuff, and that's the softer side that we finish the book with, which is if you start also looking at that and explaining that, then you realize what's that was the reason for living life.
Yes. So it's I view it as preparing our legacy, that we do this work to not only allow our wishes to be known, but maybe what we want our lives to be remembered for.
Absolutely. And it's not all numbers and financial accounts and assets, even little things. We talk about in the book, recipes that you want to make sure get passed down from generation to generation. And in my family, it's a cookie recipe, a mandel bread recipe. And that, was a recipe that my grandmother had, that now my mother has, that now I have, and I make with my kids. And I want to make sure that my kids have that recipe. So every time I make those cookies, I think of my grandmother. And every time they make these cookies, they're going to be thinking about my mom and, me one day.
We are out of time. And I want to remind our guests that, while this might not be a fun subject on the outset, it's something that we all need to do. And don't find yourself in a chaotic situation. There are things that you can do, small steps you can take today to start planning ahead for a long, ripe, juicy, beautiful, fabulous, happy life. But that makes your family members be able to mourn, to focus on their loss rather than focus on administration. I know you guys agree because we wouldn't be here otherwise.
We do. And thank you so much for talking about such an important topic.
Hugely important subject matter. And remember this, in case you get hit by a bus, plan to organize your life now for when you're not around later. That's a book. That's the subject of our conversation today. My guests have been Abbey Schneiderman, Adam Seifer, and Jean Newman. They are co-founders, co-CEOs, and educational directors over at Everplans. You can check them out at everplans.com, on Twitter at Everplans, and Facebook, as well as Instagram, Everplans. Thanks, guys. Thanks for hanging out with me today.
Thank you,
Lisa.
so much.
Thank you. We'll quickly pause and be right back.
Did you know that happiness is actually good for your health? Happy people live longer, are more productive, and make better partners, parents, and professionals. Connect with us on Facebook at Harvesting Happiness and follow Lisa on Twitter at Lisa Kamen for a daily dose of inspiration.
And we're back talking about logging off life, death, and caretaking our digital footprints. Let's get back to the conversation. My next guest is Cianna P. Stewart. She produces and hosts Dying Kindness, a podcast for people who are going to die someday. The goal is to help people make key decisions now in order to be kinder to those they'll leave behind. Wow. I want to say something, Cianna, because I think you and I share an experience with this. My aunt recently passed, and it was sudden, very unexpected, as oftentimes these things are, and there was no estate planning whatsoever. And it rendered a tsunami of chaos. And I know you shared that experience.
Yes, most definitely. That is exactly what inspired Dying Kindness, is after discovering that my father's estate was not in good shape at all when he died in 2019, and then finding myself super frustrated by that. And then I had to call myself to the carpet because I didn't have my act together either. And if I got into an accident, then, I would have been leaving behind a mess as well. So I decided to take this on, asked some other people to join me because it's easier to do all of this work with other people, and you can share resources and, talk through different options and that sort of thing. And then it just turned into a group, and that led to the podcast. So yes, a very similar thing.
I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're with me. And I'm so glad I'm not alone in this, because it has really taken a lot of work that many of us don't have time for in our days because we're so busy. We're leading our own professional lives, taking care of families. And the name of your podcast, Dying Kindness, it's really about, doing your family members a solid in getting your stuff together before you decide to exit. It's not just the good death of ourselves as individuals.
Exactly. That's the language shift and the mindset shift that I'm trying to invite people into. I think too much of our death culture, as well as our discomfort around talking about death, is because we are so incredibly focused on ourselves. And the language out there is like, what do I want for my body, and what is my legacy, and what do I want in my will, and all that kind of stuff. But actually, the ones that you love are the ones who are going to have to deal with all of that. And they're going to carry the impact of whether or not you were together, that you were thoughtful or not, or if you just ignored everything. It's gonna carry on for them and not for you.
So from the perspective of those who remain behind, who remain alive, the idea that you could walk into your departed loved one's affairs and understand what's what and how to do it all. I mean, it's massively overwhelming.
It really is. And this is one of the things I think certainly your listeners will understand when we talk about the incredible impact of stress. And grief is a form of stress that's super extreme. Your mind is overwhelmed. It's hard to make decisions. It's hard to think clearly. And it's also a time, because of the physical fact that the body starts to decay and decisions must be made in the first hours and the first, 2-3 days. Some really, really weighty decisions have to be made at exactly the same time that your brain is overwhelmed and can't be making those decisions. And if you think about how your loved ones will be struggling through all of that, I just feel like the more you can help them, the better. You can't control everything. You can't make them feel all happy or calm or whatever, but you can make it not worse.
Yes. And it's interesting you talk about those decisions that need to be made right away. And especially in the case when a loved one's wishes or position on the topic of death are never made known. In my case, my aunt didn't believe in it. Like, it wasn't happening. And
she didn't believe in death?
No, didn't believe in death. And I think it was a trait of the women on my mom and my aunt's side of the family. Like, it just doesn't exist. Like, and if you didn't talk about it or think about it, it wasn't going to happen. Like, you'd get a hall pass. It wasn't going to happen to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it turns out that the world doesn't actually operate on magical thinking.
Correct.
And I'm here in San Francisco, right next to Silicon Valley. And I know that there are a lot of people who are working on this magical thinking, we can live forever, extend everything. But the truth is none of that is happening yet. And everybody, you should just make a plan, because right now, the only 100% guarantee after you're born is that you're going to die.
Indeed. Agreed. I get it. And I also know what I've experienced in the world of positive psychology and what research tells us about having these kinds of conversations. They are so important. They build connection. They build intimacy. They actually make us feel happy and more appreciative of life when we can have these kinds of conversations with our loved ones.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that is an unexpected benefit that you really can't know until you get through it is that having these conversations can actually also reduce your fear of death. The more prepared you are for things, the more you're looking things straight in the face. It's not you remove the fear of the unknown. Suddenly you actually have much more concrete information, and you also can imagine that your loved ones are going to be okay. This is a way for you to take care of them. That's something that is a painful experience for a lot of people who are dying when they think about like, oh, how's their life going to go on, or what is the world going to be like without me? It's not an easy conversation, but it is a great one. And you're so right that again and again and again, we hear about how people who go through near-death experiences, or who are, when their cancer goes into remission or something happens where they actually like recover from a major accident or something like that, suddenly their appreciation of life and their ability to connect with others and to open their heart and to just be more present, all of that becomes so much more possible and rich, and their lives are really amazing as a result of that.
Well, when we talk about these intimate conversations, I think what we're really talking about is our vulnerability and the recognition of the impermanence of all things, including our existence.
Absolutely. I think the only tattoo that I'm going to be getting is something that says, "This too shall pass." And I love the idea of permanent ink, quote, permanent ink on my very impermanent skin as a solid reminder. I've been thinking recently, the truth is the amount of time that you're not here on this planet is so much greater than the amount of time that you are here, that I am here. And that it's actually our being alive is the exception. It's not the rule. And so it becomes so much more precious when you start to realize just how incredibly brief this stay on this planet is. And you want to do something with it and to talk to people and to connect with people. And our only legacy is our stories and our impact on others, and make it a good one.
I have the great fortune of being a caregiver for a 96-and-a-half-year-old relative who lives with us. And she is now in hospice care. There's nothing particularly wrong. She's just slowing down. And I am really I feel like a precious witness to what's going on, and the conversations and the time that we get to spend with her is very amplified right now, right? It's like we're really aware of the shortness of time, and many of us don't get to be with somebody, that old, because a lot of people don't live to that age, but then to be with somebody who is that advanced in years, who still reasonably has it all together, that can tell those stories and be very lucid about their lack of fear of death, which I think is fascinating.
That is really, really beautiful. And I also just want to take a moment to just congratulate you for accessing hospice early. I think that's something that we do not do very well in this country. And, the idea that if you can say it is time to move to comfort and connection and, let go of the idea of cure or extension, and just say, let's make the most of every moment that we're experiencing right now. It sounds like you are experiencing it in spades, just like incredible, just an incredible connection. And to get those stories with somebody who is lucid and has lived such a long life, that's amazing.
It is really amazing. And I want to just go back to what you said about hospice, because up until this event in our lives, we understood hospice to be the very, 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 very tail end palliative care that we could provide for our loved ones. And what we've learned is people can go a year or two in this state of just being kept comfortable.
That's exactly right. And the thing that is super surprising to many people is that often people actually do better and can live longer once you've accessed hospice care, because they are now relieved of the pain that was overwhelming them. You know, maybe now they have the ability to breathe better because a hospice focused on how is it we can actually get somebody to have better oxygen levels or some more energy, and like their brains can clear. You can have more connection. You know, technically hospice is, you're allowed to access it when your doctor estimates that you've got 6 months or more to live. But many, many systems, you know, it's not like, oh, if you pass the 6 month mark, you get kicked out.
No, you don't get booted.
You don't get booted. And also the other thing that people don't recognize, it's not a one-way street. You can go into hospice, and then if you get better, then you can get out of hospice, and then you can go back in as you need to. It is something that is there to provide comfort and to ease suffering. And that is not something that we should restrict to just the last couple of days or couple of weeks, which is often when people finally call hospice. And it's kind of heartbreaking to the people who are working in hospice, because they just know that they could have offered more. And not only that, but hospice also helps to take care of the caregivers. They are there to provide additional support, and often will actually continue that support after somebody has died to help you in your grief as well. So I am a huge proponent of hospice and accessing it early. There's no harm in just calling and doing an informational interview and like, is this the right time? When is the right time? That kind of thing. Do it earlier than later.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to continue the conversation with Cianna P. Stewart. To learn more about the work of Cianna P. Stewart and her podcast, Dying Kindness, please go to dyingkindness.com, on Twitter at Cianna, and on Facebook, Dying Kindness. Here comes the pause. We'll be right back, and that is a promise.
Who says money can't buy happiness? Whether you are a skeptic or seeker, check out Lisa's new book. Are we happy yet? 8 Keys to Unlocking a Joyful Life. A boot camp manual for greater emotional fitness is available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, IndieBound, and HarvestingHappiness.com. Here's a truth bomb. Emotions are contagious, and happiness is a universally desired state. But we tend to forget that we all have the freedom to be happy or the liberty to be miserable each day, regardless of external circumstances. Explore the journey of human happiness, how to find it and keep it, with Lisa's documentary film, H Factor. Where is your heart? Visit HarvestingHappiness.com to learn more.
What is your happiness?
Coming back to the conversation about logging off life, death, and caretaking our digital footprints. Let's get back to the conversation. Cianna, prior to the break, we were talking about the value of hospice and what it does for the person who is at the end of their lives in terms of providing comfort and palliative care and pain reduction, and then also the support that it provides loved ones, the family members who are the caregivers. And you and I talked during the break about the power of education, because we don't receive any education about death in life.
These days, it seems that people really only have one experience with death, and that's their own. Sometimes they'll have a few more with people in their lives, but the value, the number of questions that we have, we can actually get those questions answered, or at least have much more informed discussions if we're talking with people who are in hospice, with a doctor who's in palliative care, or just accessing a death doula. There are so many resources out there now, so you don't have to go it alone. You don't have to figure everything out. Your loved one is not the first person who's dying, and you don't have to reinvent everything, and you can get additional resources by accessing any of those resources.
Talk a little bit about death doulas, because I think that this is a fairly new profession, even though it's been practiced in layperson's terms for a long time. There is a movement to provide assistance through this period of life, similar to giving birth.
Absolutely. They borrow the terminology from the birth doulas, the idea of a birth doula being somebody who assists on your way into this world, and a death doula being a person who assists on the way out of this world. The death doula movement, or the end-of-life doula movement, is relatively new. And let me rewind a little bit to the beginning of hospice. Hospice originally was created by volunteers who noticed that there were holes in the medical system. As we started to medicalize death, there were holes in the system that needed to be taken care of, that were much more about, the person as a whole person and not just as a medical problem. And so that's where hospice emerged. After hospice became more structured and institutionalized, and especially, structured so that it could get reimbursed by things like Medicare and insurance, then there were new holes that have emerged. And so the whole new end-of-life doula movement has come forward to fill those holes. And so some people are volunteers. Some people, they find this much more of a calling than a profession. Other people are doing it as a profession. They can help you with everything from, managing your medications or your dog walking to helping you actually fill out your advanced directives or your will, making sure that you capture the stories from your life so that they can be shared later. They can do all kinds of things, even just, how do I make my room beautiful? How do I make a playlist so that, it feels good in here? These are the sorts of things that different kinds of end-of-life doulas can help you with.
Let's go back to the preparation of family and the conversation and sort of the responsible, loving things we can do to alleviate needless suffering to those who are left behind.
I strongly recommend that you just have some open conversations. It doesn't have to be around filling out a form. You can do things like there's this great deck of cards called the Death Deck that has a game in it so that you can have more relaxed conversations, or you can do things like what the Death Cafe movement or the book Let's Talk About Death Over Dinner. All of these have structures in them for you to have much more open conversations with the people who are going to be making decisions, where you can talk about things like, what is your level of balance between the amount of pain that you're willing to endure versus how much lucidity you want? How connected and able to speak do you want? Often those two things are at odds with each other. Mm-hmm. So the more pain you alleviate, the less you're able to talk. And other people want to know that because it's really hard to watch your loved one in pain. But if they know that your priority is on having conversations, then that helps them to make that decision. In the same way that, if you maybe haven't specifically decided exactly where you want your body to end up, giving people a context for, I want it to feel like this, or I really care about environmental considerations, or I really care about religious considerations, or I want it to be a cultural moment. All of these things are things that other people will benefit greatly if they know a bigger picture of how you even think about your life as well as how you think about death.
I want to just touch upon something around that area. In the days after my aunt passed, I came to the realization that the funeral industry is kind of a racket, right? And
yeah,
it was really startling and appalling, right? That to give somebody a proper burial or get them ready to rest, whether it was through cremation or burial, runs the gamut between a couple of $1,000s up in, it can go into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending upon the bells and whistles that you choose. And my experience in watching my family go through this is they were victims. Mm-hmm. They were being preyed upon in the most vulnerable time of life.
Yeah.
And it was like a used car salesman had come to the room.
Yeah. Big sigh on my part. So The funeral industry is widely divergent. I'm just going to say that right up front. Not every funeral director is a terrible person, but sadly there are many who really are taking advantage of that moment. Like I said, when you are grieving in the first shock of the first, day or two after somebody's died, it is a terrible time for you to be making financial decisions. And it opens up a perfect opportunity for somebody to prey on your grief or on your guilt. This way of like, don't you want to show them how much you cared by basically spending more right now? And right now, paying for a funeral and all of the costs of death it's often the third most expensive thing that people will spend on in their entire lives.
Yes.
The number one being their house or their education, and then it's their death.
Tens of thousands of dollars.
Tens of thousands of dollars. And then often the process of dying and if it's very extended or if it's extremely medicalized, it can also be incredibly expensive. And that is one of the number one ways, if not the number one way that people go bankrupt in the United States is on spending for the dying process or for medical care, which is terrible. And so now you've got people who have gone through a painful and expensive death process. Now they're faced with trying to decide on a funeral, and they are extremely vulnerable. And often the funeral industry takes advantage of that moment. This is one of the reasons why some people do prepaying for their funerals, or they do arrangements to have their body cremated so that a lot of those decisions, especially around caskets and burial plots, are handled already. So there's also funeral insurance available out there. Because there's been some sketchiness around the prepaying industry for funerals as well. Or if you're very young and you don't know if you're going to be moving in the future, you might be better off with doing insurance for this, or having a specially allocated bank account instead of prepaying through a particular funeral director's home.
And there are very unique products on the market now that have been brought to my attention, like diamonds, that you can take your loved one's ashes and make diamonds out of them. That's pretty neat.
I have an entire episode on the things that you can do with cremated remains. And they range from, getting shot into space, being turned into diamonds, being added to bird feeders, being mixed into paint for a portrait. You can also be put into shotgun shells and taken out on a last hunt. You can be mixed with cement and being put into an artificial reef. So, there's more. There's many, many more. There's enough for an entire episode. And it's one of those things where sometimes that's actually much more about what the living wants to do. You have to make the decision from the beginning. Do you want to be buried? Do you want to be cremated? Or, other new things that are come up, like, do you want to be cremated the traditional way by fire, or do you want the newer way by water? Or if you're in the Seattle area, can you get your body composted?
Wow. So, didn't know about that.
Brand new, Recompose. I'm super fan. It's not available yet here in California, but they are working on getting that extended all over the place. It's a great new innovation, and there's going to be new things coming up all the time. So sort of, keep an ear out on your death options.
Well, I think, what this conversation really points out, that we talk about, dying the good death for the patient or the loved one. And then the flip side of it is the responsible death, right? Like that what we as individuals can do to protect our legacies, our families, to minimize, chaos, in a very difficult time. And, we do that through some very basic vehicles, right? A will, estate planning, having, short and sweet conversations about it so people understand what our wishes are. It doesn't have to be morose and dark.
It definitely does not. And, if there's only 3 things that you take care of, because there are a huge range of decisions, definitely we all know that we need to take care of the will or trust, and yes. You need to talk to an estate lawyer about that. 100% everybody who is 18 or over needs to have an advance directive, also called a living will, also called an advance care directive or a health care directive. That is the thing, whether or not you're planning, or you know how the time of the process of your death because you have a terminal illness, or you just might get into an accident, we all need to have that document so that other people know what to do if we're incapacitated and still alive and decisions need to be made. And the other thing that you need is a power of attorney for finances. And part of the advanced directive is also to do a power of attorney for healthcare.
Yes.
Have those documents, and you'll make life so much easier, for everybody who you love, that you say you love. You should not put an extra burden on them. You should not outsource your discomfort onto them. You should just take care of it yourself, make those decisions, and then have them in a place that you tell people where they are. That's the other thing. Don't hide that.
Yes, it's not some secret. It shouldn't be in some secret box somewhere, some special place with air quotes. It should be known and accessible, most definitely. And as you're describing, what to do and where to keep it, I'm thinking, if only, things would have just been so different, so much easier.
Agreed. I would have been a lot less mad at my father if he had his act together.
And it conserves resources too.
It conserves resources for sure. It also makes grief less complicated. If I was able to just grieve my dad, I would have really welcomed that. But instead, it got really complicated because I was frustrated, and then it just got dragged on. And, then I started kicking myself about why didn't I talk to him about this earlier or make him make this decision? And, it just got even messier than it needed to be.
So the moral here is plan, take a little bit of time, and plan and make things easier for those that you love. And this subject, we can talk about it, forever. And you've made a whole podcast about this. And I bet you have a ton of listeners who are interested in this because it's a very interesting subject, actually.
It is. And many people actually want to talk about this. This is the thing that you don't know until you turn into somebody like me who says, I have a podcast, or, go ahead and you can talk to me about death. Many people want to talk about this. It's just so socially taboo that if you open the conversation, very likely you're going to actually get some very animated, deep and heartfelt responses, and some probably really ridiculous stories as well.
My guest today has been Cianna P. Stewart. She is the producer and host of Dying Kindness. To learn more about her show and her work, please go to dyingkindness.com. On Twitter, you could find her at Cianna, and on Facebook, Dying Kindness as well. Cianna, thanks for hanging out with me today and talking about the subject that nobody likes to talk about, but I like talking about it with you.
I really like talking about it with you too, Lisa. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us on Harvesting Happiness today. This is Lisa Cypers Kamen, and my guests, Abbey Schneiderman, Jean Newman, Adam Seifer, and Cianna Stewart, wishing you kind thoughts, kinder words, and the kindest of actions. Until next time, remember, happiness is an inside job. Happiness is your inside job. Please go out and rock your day, and remember to be kind to one another.
Keep harvesting your own happiness anytime and anywhere, from the comfort of wherever you are. Subscribe, listen, and share hundreds of downloadable episodes via our free app or from our libraries at toginet.com, iTunes, Google Play, and other fine podcast platforms. To learn more about Lisa's global consulting services, please visit harvestinghappiness.com. Spread more joy by liking us on Facebook at Harvesting Happiness and following Lisa on Twitter at Lisa Kamen. Harvesting Happiness is produced in collaboration with TogiNet Radio, KBUU Radio Malibu.net, and is available on PRX, the Public Radio Exchange.